Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, a window into the soul of the North Fork of Long Island. We'll delve into the pulse of our community, its pressing issues, promising opportunities, and the rich stories that weave our shared history. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 98, we sit down with Yan Albaladejo, an amateur historian and political organizer with deep roots in the North Fork. Yan shares the story of his journey from Puerto Rico to Greenport as a child and how his love for history and learning blossomed here, especially at the local library. He talks about his path to higher education, studying public policy, and the various internships that shaped his career, from working in Washington D.C. to collaborating with local leaders like Mayor Kevin Stuessi and the North Fork Environmental Council. In this conversation, we dive into some of the pressing issues Yan is passionate about, from housing and poverty to the effects of climate change on the region. We also explore his thoughts on social media and his hopes for the future of the North Fork. So I hope you enjoy episode 98 with Yan Albaladejo. This episode was recorded September 28th, 2024. Thank you so much for coming on to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to our talk today.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
So I'd like to just start off, if you could give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised.
All right. So my name is Yan Marcos Albaladejo Ramirez. A bit of a mouthful there. A lot of you guys who are listening to this probably know me as Yan Marcos. If you do know me, that's what I went by as a kid. I was born in Puerto Rico. I came over here when I was about 4 or 5, and then ever since I landed at JFK, I've lived in Greenport my whole life, and now I'm going to school in the city, but I'm still a Porter at heart and a North Forker. I'm studying public policy and history at NYU, but anyone who knows me knows that I love to crack jokes and I love to talk about history. Those are my 2 favorite things in life.
Awesome. And in terms of your ancestry with Puerto Rico, have you been able to look back in terms of how far your ancestry can go, whether on either your parents' side?
So on my father's side, when you trace the records, it goes about to the 1750s. So we've been in Puerto Rico since at least then, possibly further. There's just not very good record keeping. Yeah, I haven't really been able to trace my mother's genealogy yet. That's not as good, but I do have some ancestry I found with some documents going back to 1750.
Nice. And before we even get to your parents, did you get to meet some of your grandparents?
Yes, I've met all of my grandparents. My abuelo Wayu is my grandpa who I spent a lot of time with. And then my abuelas Cuca and Angela. Those are my mom's mom and my dad's mom. And Wayu is my dad's father. And I spent a lot of time with them growing up. And even then, I used to go back to Puerto Rico in the summer to spend some times with them. So they've all been very influential figures in my upbringing.
And do you know what they did for work?
Okay, so my grandpa, he was in the Army. He was in Vietnam. And then when he got out, he started an AC company that he still works. So he does a lot of HVAC work. My abuela Angela, she helps run a home for the elderly and helps care for the elderly. Well, at least she did before she retired and became the elderly. And then my abuela Cuca worked as a secretary in the Department of Education in Puerto Rico. She was a secretary, and then she's retired and moved on to Social Security now.
And are they all in Puerto Rico?
Yes, as much as we want them all to come over here, they've been very firm that they're going to stay in Puerto Rico.
They feel comfortable and enjoy.
Yeah, a lot of their kids for the most part have made it to either Florida or New York, but they're sticking it through.
And are they more in San Juan or?
Yeah, about in the San Juan area, a little bit. My grandpa lives a little bit further out. My grandma lives in Carolina, which is a little bit further out than San Juan.
Okay. And then in terms of your parents, they grew up in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, they grew up in Puerto Rico. My mom spent a little bit of time in the Dominican Republic. My dad spent a little bit of time in Philadelphia with some family, but mostly in Puerto Rico.
And how was it for them? Or do they talk about their time growing up in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, my mom always talks about her time in Puerto Rico very fondly and her time in the DR. She misses home. To her, that is still home. My dad, his upbringing was a little bit different in Puerto Rico, and he talks about how life is better here, but he still misses home.
And how did they meet?
Oh, my parents were high school sweethearts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And what year was that they decided to move over here?
So 2008.
Okay.
About 2008 or 2009. Me, my mom, and my sister came first, and my dad came about a month later.
And were they already working in Puerto Rico before that?
Yeah. So on my father's side of the family, he had worked for an airport. He luggage handler, kind of like some manual labor. He was also an airplane mechanic. And then my mother wasn't employed.
And so they decided to come over to the U.S. And how did Greenport come into the...
I had an aunt on Shelter Island, and we stayed with her for about a month or two. And then my parents found a place in Greenport back when it was affordable, and we hopped off the island over here, and we've loved it ever since.
And I don't know if you wanted to say what your dad ended up doing out here or working.
My dad used to always tell me this story when I was a kid to talk about opportunities. When he first got here, he hadn't found a job yet. He basically bought the ticket from the city and taken the 2 trains over here, and he was looking for work. He had to pay rent. And then so told me he found a job interview at IGA, and the man asked, "Do you know how to bake?" And my dad he'd never touched the kitchen in his life. He was like, "Yes, I'm the best baker. I make the best bread. I have lots of experience. Back in Puerto Rico, I used to bake all the time, cakes, bread, and everything." And the guy at IGA said, "Listen, man, I know you're lying. You're green as grass. We know you've never touched a pan, but you're showing a lot of enthusiasm, and you've got the spirit, and we know that you really want to make things work." And then they hired him to start working at the deli counter. So some of my earliest memories are me going to IGA, and my dad would cut me off some of the slices of pepperoni and hand it to me.
So even then, that was affordable at that time.
We lived... Have you been to Ralph's? Of course you've been to Ralph's, right?
Yes.
Right on the left of Ralph's, they had the little alley that goes to the water. You're going to walk down that alley and find a door. I used to live on the top floor of that building.
Okay.
And that's where we lived for a very, very long time.
And then even to get to you, how was it for you as a child growing up in the area? As a child, what would you do for fun?
So Greenport is this like mecca of walkability in like the Sahara Desert of car dependency that is the North Fork. So I'm very grateful for that. I could walk wherever I wanted. As a kid, I wasn't very athletic. I always liked to enjoy video games when I was younger. I used to walk down to the library, always lived less than 10 minutes away. I would use the computers on here. I'd play Tetris or Mario or something until I got my hands on a DS. I used to walk down to the school and we would play soccer and baseball. We used to walk down to Mitchell Park, dip our toes in the water before we knew that it wasn't too clean. Go down to 6th Street. I used to love to fish. What else? I like to walk around Greenport, obviously. And I like to read and write a lot. My fascination with history started very young. I was about 6 and we moved out of that apartment building and we moved to some other building. And before we had any new furniture, I was just glad because the other building was a little bit decrepit, had roaches, it was dirty. This place was clean as can be, nice carpet floors. We didn't have any furniture yet. I had a mattress on the floor where I sat down. I had my sister's like tablet or something, and some YouTube video popped up for me on the Haitian Revolution. And then something after that just clicked. And ever since that moment, I've loved history and I devoured it.
And then you mentioned that you would use the library quite frequently, even into middle school and high school. Always come over. And
the teen programming out here was so good. When I was like 12 to 16, before I could drive, me and my friends would always come here. We'd hang out in the library. We'd read. We'd play the video games. The teen programming here was always so good. And the programming as a kid was also very good. Joe, the old librarian, I used to go here all the time when I was a kid because he would always help me. He'd tell me, "You're a really strange kid, You're always looking for these weird books. Everybody else wants butterflies or dragons or something, and you're out here asking me about the French Revolution and things like that. But I'll help you out."
Nice.
I used to love coming here. Still do.
And then in terms of your schooling experience, how was that? Because that's all in the one building pretty much. You didn't have to move into a new building.
No, I guess to me it's normal, but to everyone else who I talk to, a lot of the people here who didn't go to Greenport High School or even the other kids at NYU, they think it's absolutely bizarre. I was always in the same building. And then from a kindergarten all the way to my senior year, I was mostly with the same kids. And there's downsides to that, of course, but I really loved the experience, is getting to grow with the same amount of people and make friendships with people, lifelong friendships, especially now that I realize kind of how fickle life can be and how people aren't always going to spend their time together. Like, for example, there's a lot of people leaving and you fall out with a lot of people after high school. It was just nice to get to grow and make those memories. And I don't want to say I was a bad kid, but I was a bit of a troubled youth, not really with the grades, more of with the behavior sometimes. And it was nice to feel at home. I could feel at home at school. Some people go to school and there's a bunch of people they never met and a bunch of teachers they'll have for one class and never see again. But I kind of got to progress through life with the same people, and they got to see me grow, and I got to take their advice and grow alongside with them. If that makes sense.
And were there any particular role models or teachers that were important throughout that time period? Even with history, if you came upon that on your own, or even in history class with one of the teachers being influential?
From a history point of view, my first middle school history class, which is when we really start to learn, was with Mr. Kalesa in his last year. A lot of Greenporters remember Mr. Kalesa. He was very eccentric. I always remember him. He was always like, Yan, you're lazy. You never hand in your work. This is sloppy quality, but God damn it, I know you're good at this. And he would always kind of push me to be better. And then I remember it was time for my 7th grade final, and I'd never even studied. I didn't start studying until I got to college. I was blowing it off. And he's like, Yan, you're going to fail this test and you're going to have to grow up after this. And then I remember I walked out of it with 100, and then I never saw Mr. Kalesa. He retired again, but he's kind of like lit this fire in me, I guess, with a love of history, because what he showed me is that I have to appreciate it more. It's not something you walk in and out of. It's kind of like some people are very athletic, other people are singers, some people are artists, and they show this love for their craft. And he showed me the history. It's not like math, what a lot of people think math is, where you just have to do the equations and pass the test and get out. It's like, this is our story. You have to show it some passion, and you have to show it some energy. And then one day, hopefully, you'll be in my position, scalding some kid, telling him to do the same thing. And then I had Mr. Holt, who was my history teacher after that. He still works down in Greenport, and he really nurtured it. Kalesa was always telling me I was a very lazy student and things like that, but Holt was always like, I want to see you grow as a student. You're so good at this. I've never had anyone who's loved history the same amount as you. And he really helped me grow. And I went from just some dude who had a hobby to really somebody who's studying this and enjoying this. And this is something I can now pass to other people. And then I had 2 other teachers who were a very big influence. I took 7th grade science with Mr. Martellata, which wasn't a very important class. But as I said before, I was a lazy 7th grader, and I never really went outside much. I was usually here, or I was playing video games somewhere. And he was like, if you come to football practice today, I'm going to give you a free sweatshirt and you'll pass your next test, no matter what. And I was like, sure, I'll go. And then ever since then, I started to play football. And I don't miss playing football. I miss the experience of being with those guys and those memories I've made, and just doing something I never thought I would be able to do. Going from some lazy kid with asthma to someone who could run down the field and, catch a ball. Yeah.
And besides history, were you interested in any of the other core classes, or was there a class that you particularly didn't like?
So my English classes, I used to always love the writing aspects of them. I would always write essays, even in my free time, on topics I liked, and I wanted to grow as a writer. So I'd be in random classes, like I'd be in math class, scribbling down something I wanted to write. But I was not a very big fan of literature. And so I dreaded going to class and having to read things. Like whenever we would have Shakespeare or some other works of classic American literature, I would be like, oh, I'm going to dread this. And then, they do the popcorn reading and they'd pick on me and I don't know where we are and I'm asking someone. I never really say there was a class that I didn't like. A lot of people hate math. I didn't really hate math. I just didn't want to give it any more attention than I thought it needed. But I was very interested in my classes. I was very close between science and history when I was younger before I decided science was not for me. It's not, I didn't think it was too hard. I just thought that somebody else would enjoy doing this a lot more than I ever could.
And then coming out of high school, did you know what you wanted to do?
So at first, like up until my sophomore year, I was like, no, I don't think I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go be a mechanic, or I'm going to go work on air conditioners like my dad. And then I don't know what changed in me. One day I was like, okay, I'm going. It just came out of nowhere in my mind, another click. And then I was like, I have to go. And at first I was going to go for environmental science because I wanted to be an urban planner. I thought I want to go to college for 4 years, mediocre grades, walk out with a degree. I know I could get a job, and I'm very interested in planning. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna build the best cities there are. And then once I got to college, my first semester, I got to choose my elective. I took a history class, and then I was like, I still really love this. Something I always used to tell my mom as a kid was like, if being a history teacher paid, I'd love to do that, but I know it doesn't pay. And then I was like, maybe I'd want to look further into this. And then NYU was like, actually, environmental science is a master's now. Now we have environmental studies. So it was kind of like I had the rug pulled from underneath me. And I was thinking, what am I going to do now? So I started taking the history classes because I'm on a scholarship. And I was like, listen, I love this. And if I could get a history degree for free, why not do it? And I found public policy. I was thinking about politics for a while, but people who know me know I'm not very into politics most of the time. There's times where I have to be loud and I have to shout, but most of the time I like the laws themselves and how they're crafted. I don't like the fight to get them passed. I'm more of like a bread and butter type of guy. I like, do this, and we could fix this problem. I'm not very interested in like negotiate this and that. So I picked public policy over poli-sci, and also I dread political theory. Like I like to add I like to act like I'm a very pragmatic person, and I just thought political theory was just me sitting in class and, flipping the pages on Marx and telling you why money works or it doesn't, and not putting anything into practice. And I just really didn't like that. So I was like, policy. One of the main reasons I chose policy is I've told you guys I'm very into history. For me, it's like a Rubik's Cube, right? The Rubik's Cube is the world and it's all spread out and I want to understand it. It's the same reason I like science. You figure out a chemical reaction, you figure out a piece of history. You're just moving the Rubik's Cube just a little bit to solve it. And then as I was growing up, I became very interested in other parts of the Rubik's Cube, things like linguistics and ethnicity and nationality and the law and the social sciences in general. And I was like, I could put all these things to work right here. And I could also learn more and nurture that more while I study public policy. And then instead of just these being things that are nice to know, these are things that I could actually use and put to use. So I basically see public policy as like, I'm wielding all the social sciences, which I love dearly, and getting to put them to good use.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Even within academia, that other side within the theory part, I think a lot of people can just go back and forth talking different theoretical theories, and it doesn't really move, or just kind of, you just can keep going, arguing back and forth. You don't get anything done within that aspect. I mean, it's nice to talk intellectually about that, but it's not something that, like you said, you see progress.
Yes. Greenport is a very blue collar place. So I feel like growing up, I like, it's in my head. I want things to be pragmatic. I don't want to be running all over the place. And I want my time to be used efficiently and to get to action. And I had a freshman seminar on, what was it? I think it was like education in the modern world. And I saw two students get into like a very theoretical argument between Roman and Chinese philosophy. And that was when I threw in the towel. I was like, okay, no poli-sci. This is not for me.
And I was also curious, you decided to go to college, but were you looking, I mean, obviously you were looking off of Long Island, or were you thinking I need to see something different or get outside of the Greenport at that point?
I guess everybody else was like, I have to leave Greenport. It wasn't really as on my mind as much. And I applied to schools up and down the East Coast, though, because I was like, if I can get some space, why not? And I applied to schools in Northern California, I think San Francisco. And then all the applications started rolling in. You get about 20 free applications on the Common App, which I used to the fullest extent, and I sent them all over the place. And my first college letter was from Clemson, and I opened the mail and I was excited, and it said a big fat, "I'm sorry, but we can't take you. You're denied." And they write you the nice little letter saying whatever. And I thought my life was over. I thought it was finished, and I was super stressing. And then all the other college letters started to come in, and I was like, oh, looks like my life's not over. I do have a chance. But in the beginning, when I was making that decision, it was mostly schools in Florida. I missed the temperature. I wanted to go back to the heat. And then schools in New York, mostly upstate. I applied to a lot of SUNYs. I wanted to stay SUNY. And then some schools in D.C. So what I was really thinking was go somewhere where I like the weather or stay home, basically.
And your parents were supportive?
Yeah, so my parents are first gen, and they really have no idea. I mean, technically I'm first gen, but they really had no idea about the college process. So I kind of went through it alone. And there's people whose parents are like, oh, we can't afford this, or there's too far away. But my parents were kind of just there to like applaud me, I guess. And I told them about all these different places, and they were like, yeah, just keep applying wherever you want to go. It's up to you. This is your decision. I definitely didn't apply to a lot of private schools. They were very expensive, but I did apply to some in the Northeast. So I was thinking Northeast or Florida for the most part. What really came into consideration for that is I wanted to stay SUNY because it was affordable. And before I got my acceptance to NYU, which I got very late, I had my heart set on going to Binghamton for urban planning. Yeah.
And then you got the NYU letter later and just said, I'm going to go.
This is actually how it went. I opened the mailbox one day. They were supposed to send the emails like 3 days later, and I never got the email. So I was like, oh, no, we're going to Binghamton. No problem. I visited Binghamton. Love is a strong word, but I was like, I enjoy it. It's nice, calm, and quaint. And then I look in the mailbox the next day, and I see this big purple envelope. And I open it up, and of course, it's like you got in. And the first thing I do is I tear the Binghamton bumper sticker off my mom's car, and I put on the NYU one.
And now are you going into your third year?
Yes, I'm going into my junior year.
And separate from just the school, well, obviously the school environment is different because it's an urban campus compared to Binghamton. But how has it been so far, your college experience, and then even just being in New York City?
Let's start with the college experience part. So I haven't really had the normal college experience. Like, people will go to like a big public school and they'll go and they'll, everybody's thinking frat sorority, or you're just hanging out in the dorm. You're pretty far away from any city. You're taking the bus out and you live on campus. And it's a very social experience. And it was a social experience for me, but I guess the way I've been at college is I feel like New York City is this big ocean, right? And they took me from here where I love what's going on, but there's not much of it going on, and there's not too many people, especially in the winter. And they dropped me in this big pool where I went from a big fish in a big-ish pond to a small fish in an ocean. And they said, do whatever you want, just make sure your homework gets done. And so I've really just been finding myself while I've been in New York City. I've been finding myself academically. I've really enjoyed my classes. I've enjoyed studying this because it's a very big passion of mine. And sometimes it is boring, but I just feel very honored that I could do something like this. I always think, what is it? I think like at the time of the American Revolution, it was like 0.01 of Americans had college degrees. And I'm like, look at me now in this very expensive university, in this very old city, taking advantage of this opportunity and making the most of it. So that always makes me feel honored. And aside from growing academically, there's just so many opportunities in the city. And I've really gotten to do the things I've loved. I've gotten to meet people. I've gotten to do things like grassroots efforts. I've gotten to reflect a lot on life back here in a different atmosphere. And I've grown from here where I feel like I always learn to be self-sufficient, to do things myself. No one else is going to do them with you too. I get to the city and it's like, you're no longer anything. You're a part of this big system. You're just another clog in the machine. I got to experience that again. I spent my last spring semester in D.C. for an internship, and all the D.C. interns, I'll tell you, one of the biggest parts of the job is they'll tell you right down when you get to the beginning, because a lot of people walk in with high expectations and they're a little naive and sometimes obnoxious. And then so, they tear you down with as constructive criticism as you could get. And I kind of felt like when I moved to New York City for the first time, just getting to experience being part of something, even though you're not the main part of it, really teaches you to appreciate the things in life, and it teaches you to appreciate others more.
And in terms of your other classmates, have a lot of them left Greenport as well?
Yes.
Or are they, some of them are in college, or?
I think my class was about like 60 people. I'd say about a half went to college, almost all in state. The other 30, like 20 have stayed in Greenport and 10 have gone out west.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whether it's for affordability or other opportunities.
Yes, employment, things like that. It's not very easy to get a job with healthcare in Greenport and things like that. But it's still nice that I still see a lot of the people that I went to high school with. When I come home, I'll be in Goldberg's and I'll always see somebody that I've been to school with. And it's just always nice to catch up because everyone's always saying how far, they want to get away. But at heart, we're all just Greenporters and we miss it. We miss being in the kindergarten classroom together. I think, though, for my classmates that did go to college, they won't be coming back. I think they all have their eyes set somewhere else out west.
Okay. Like when you say west, even like California or
like
Colorado.
I use west because it brings back like this idea of like this wild west, or like we're making our way across the plains. But I mean from NASA to California, they're headed out.
Okay. And now you said you've done some internships in Washington, D.C. and then even now you're doing an internship at the North Fork Environmental Council. What were some other ones that?
I'll give you a breakdown. So my first internship was with Mayor Stuessi. Greenport Councilwoman Doherty, I messaged her on Instagram one day during the summer of my freshman year. I was like, do you know anywhere where I could possibly intern? She's like, the Historical Society is probably open. I'll look around and ask. And then she's like, well, actually, I talked to the mayor and he said he would love to have you as an intern. Mr. Stuessi had just been elected and I'd never met him. And then one day he was like, well, come into Aldo's and we'll talk about what you're thinking about doing. And then Mr. Stuessi really gave me my first shot. He gave me, I was a policy intern for the entire summer, 40 hours a week. And that was like my first big break. And I got to really dip my feet in all the stuff I'd been reading about and watching in the water. And, when you're an intern in something like politics or policy, everybody knows it's like you get 30% of the stuff you want to do. 70% is the stuff that you have to do to justify being there. So, I do other things like I do mail and I do paperwork. And then on Friday or something, he'd throw me the bone. He'd be like, here. And then I caught my big break. My last Friday there, he was like, well, the Airbnbs are running rampant in Greenport and we're making this housing database about which house has a rental permit, who's allowed to rent and who's not. And then I was like, okay. And he was like, make it. And I was like, okay. So he gave me this little sheet with all the houses in Greenport, and I had to go through every single rental permit and see who had a rental permit and who didn't. And then if some information was missing, I went through like tax documents and things like that, and I got a lot of experience for that. And that really helped out when I applied to my next internship, which was at Congressman Alota's office, Republican for the 1st District, which is most of Suffolk County. He's our congressman. I did that internship in D.C. Congressional internships are pretty prestigious and they're very coveted and they're super hard to get, but more importantly, they're super expensive because you get paid less than minimum wage. I got about $1,000 a month and you got to pay for housing and food. So I was trying to figure out what could I do. And NYU has a very big emphasis on semester abroad, Buenos Aires, Madrid, and Paris. And at first I was going to go to Madrid. I had my application in, I had the passport. I just had to go and get the visa. And then I was like, hold up. Why not try to apply to a internship in DC? Because they have an office in DC. That way I don't have to pay for the food. I don't have to pay for the housing. I could get the most out of this opportunity and the scholarship. And I applied. I called into the office. I was like, hey, are you guys taking any interns for the spring? And he was like, well, we get most of our interns in the winter and in the summer. So yeah, we're looking for interns for the spring. And I was like, okay. And then he was like, who do I reach out to? And he's like, actually, the intern coordinator is right next to me right now. I'll just hand you the phone. And he was like, email me a resume. And then the same thing happened again where it was a little late. So I think the application to go to DC was due on like December 1st or something, and I already had Madrid in. And then on like December 2nd, I get a call, and it's like, hey, Jan, would you like to be an intern? And I was hooting and hollering. It was like I got into NYU all over again. I was like, yes, absolutely. I'd love that opportunity. And that was one of the most pivotal times in my life, just actually getting to experience it and being in DC and getting to meet all these different people. One of my favorite DC memories is there's this little subway, because the senators are pretty old, right? So there's a subway that connects the Capitol to the Senate office buildings, and then the Capitol to the congressional office building. So I needed to pick up something from, I think it was Senator Gillibrand's office. So they sent me on the subway. No one else wanted to do it. And then I'm getting on the subway, and I hear this voice of someone talking right behind me. And I'm like, that sounds very similar. But I was like, whatever. It's probably some staffer I've seen a million times before. So I get off the subway, and somebody steps on my shoe. And I was like, listen, like, who steps on my shoe? And I might be from Greenport, but I'm still in New York, and I'm about to say anything. And I look over, and then it's Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney is like, oh, I'm sorry about that, son. What's your name? And I'm like, my name is Sean. He's like, oh, nice to meet you, son. Keep working hard out there. I'm so sorry about this. Where are you from? And I get like a 30-second conversation with Mitt Romney. My eyes just kind of lit up, because I'm not really the biggest Mitt Romney fan. You know, it's like you're at Disney and you meet Disney.
Yeah.
And and then also I got to do a lot of political work there, which, you know, it was nice, but more importantly, I got to do a lot of policy work that I actually enjoyed. A lot of real stuff. Like I got to research policy. Of course, I still had to write letters and mail those out and bring chocolates and stuff to other offices. But I really loved that experience. I got to go to briefings. I went to like MTA briefings and things like that. And I got to soak in a lot of stuff, and what is really a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Definitely. No, that sounds wonderful. And I mean, you're kind of just seeing the backbones of or the bones of the structure of DC that a lot of people don't get to see. And probably you've seen some of the challenges in terms of trying to get things passed, or with working with congressmen or some other people. But that also was probably an experience that was something you might have want to do in the future.
Yes, that's when I decided, because before that I had always wanted to go, even since I was a kid, I wanted to get my law degree. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to get a constitutional law degree. I was always a big fan of like Washington and Hamilton. You know, like most of the people have presidents and stuff. I had like a photo of Washington, and I had Hamilton, and I had Lincoln. And I was like, I want to be a constitutional lawyer. And then I got to DC, and I was like, I want to get my master's. I want to work in this forever. I want to work at a think tank. I want to write. I want to do things like that. And I'm still thinking right now about what I want to do in the future, of course, but that just opened up my mind completely. And it opened so much more possibilities of what I can do and what I want to do. And a lot of people, like some people go into DC and they may be a little bit naive coming in, and they're like, they walk out and they're like, oh, I found out like how politics actually works and I hate it. I don't want to do this type of work anymore. But I was actually very cynical when I came into DC, and I think I might be the only person who was going to say this, who went to DC. So I got to DC and I was like, you know, they're not as corrupt as I thought it would be. Maybe I do want to keep doing this. And I learned to appreciate government a lot more, and the job in general. So I'm not really that much of a cynic anymore when it comes to things like that, and I'm more open to becoming involved.
And do you think just other people at your age, in terms of other younger people wanting to get involved in politics, is that something that you've seen other people where they're just, I'm not getting involved, or I'm not interested in that, I'm going to do something else? Or because I don't know, I think it's changing, but some people would say that it's harder to get younger people involved working or to improve the town. But maybe it's not fair to say, because they're also dealing with what they want to do in life, and whether the challenges of just employment or even student loans and stuff like that might come into play. So someone like you that already has that passion to get involved, even say on whether it's state, federal, or local level, Is that something that you see with your other peers?
I think so. I feel like the town specifically, when it comes to getting my generation in town politics, the problem is that a lot of us don't see the future here. So we don't really feel invested in the community unless you know you're going to inherit a house or something. I think that what we need to do to get more people involved is we need to put a focus on civic education because, people just usually read the headline and they're like, oh, they're banning TikTok, and they don't understand the process that goes into that and how you could become involved. But I feel like younger people are really starting to gravitate towards politics. I feel like we talk about it very freely, definitely more than the older generations do. We've become very interested in it. It's a growing part of our lives. But I feel like with the way everything is going, I feel like we're going to see a lot more young people become involved in politics, not so willingly. I always like to say I didn't join politics because it was an interest of mine. I don't really know if it's an interest to this day. I grew up a very poor child. My mother always worked very hard to provide for us, but I was poverty stricken. So I wanted to kind of put an end to that. And I feel like we're going to see more people who have a catalyst, more younger people, something that affects them, whether it's they feel like they're being discriminated against or it's an economic situation that's going to drive them to become more local, active participators. I feel like that's definitely going to happen, and this generation is headed on its own to political organization using things like social media, which is very helpful. And to be honest, I think we're actually going to surpass older generations in terms of political involvement. But I think that no matter wherever you are in this nation, we need to put an emphasis on municipal involvement, because that's the one thing that I don't really see young people become engaged in, because as I said before, they feel like if I don't own a house in this neighborhood, I might not live here forever, so there's no reason to get involved. I'm not really invested in this.
Yes. And then separate from that, did you want to talk about your current internship?
Yes.
At the North Fork Environmental Council?
So I was just in my office in D.C. Not my office. I was in the office in D.C. right next to my other intern, my friend Jonathan. And I was putting in my applications, and I put them in everywhere. So I sent out a bunch of them, and I sent out an email to the North Fork Environmental Council, like, hey, do you need an intern? NYU gives out internship grants, so payment's not a problem, which really opened the doors. And I got a bunch of responses from different places. I think I got one from like Group on the East End, and then some things like that. I don't have a particularly green thumb, but like I said before, I really like the bread and butter. And when I got to the NFEC office with Anne Murray, who's been my mentor, and she's really been my intern coordinator and helped me with my networking and this internship and pushing myself so much. So thank you to her. But when I got to the office, I was like, man, this place, it was like brick walls. It still smelled of cigarettes, even though it'd been years since anyone smelled in there. It was dusty. I was coughing. There was files everywhere, and there was people talking. And then Anna's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, the place isn't too clean. I hope this doesn't give off a bad image. And I was like, actually, this is perfect. Because just by the fact that like all this stuff is laying around, I could tell that you guys who are always in here are actually getting to the busy work, and you're not really worried about all the fluff on it. And I was like, this is exactly what I want to do. And probably shouldn't have done this, but I just stopped replying to the other emails. And I was like, and I work mornings and weekends at the restaurant. I work at Noah's in Greenport. I was like, any other time, I'd love to intern. So I've spent time going with Anne to meetings in a kind of like a watchdog capacity. She's telling me how you kind of investigate your local government, what to see and what to be like, hey, that's a little suspicious. You might want to check that out. And she's put me under her wing with many of the lessons she's gotten from New York City. And she has helped me with so much. Like when I first started the internship, she set up some dates for programming, which I recently did, one on affordable housing and one on battery and energy storage systems out here on the North Fork. And at first I was so scared, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that. And then she got me to stuck with it, and then I finished that, and I feel like I really grew as a person, and I had way more confidence in myself, and I feel like it was another snap. I'm on my third snap now. It's another transformative moment. And even though DC was so great, and it definitely looks the best on my resume, I think this latest internship with the NFEC has been the best I've ever done. Just getting involved in the municipal level and really doing grass work and walking away with lessons, because I went from being a clog in the machine in New York City to out of nowhere and DC, and to nowhere I'm back home. And I felt like me again. I felt like I had some sway to me, like I could do things that matter. And now I'm going to go back to the city with this, and let's see how I go being pop back into that. But it was just really such a great experience and my favorite of all the internships. I'm very big on career development. All my friends are always know I'm always hounding them, get an internship. So I'm definitely looking at future internship opportunities too.
And I think, like you said, that's brought you back to the North Fork where you could see some of the other issues and be involved in some of the discussions, like even the forum on zoning, and you said the battery storage. So that was, you got to see firsthand some more of that than just, obviously it was still important in DC, but like this brought you back.
And another thing is that, like I said before, I'm not really much of an environmentalist, but one thing I learned when you want to go into law is you're going to have to do things you don't really like or care too much about. So I feel like not only have I gained an appreciation for environmentalism I definitely didn't have before. I actually do care about it now, but also just getting to grow into the mold of doing something, not because you're passionate, but because you're disciplined, was a very great opportunity and a life lesson.
And then you mentioned that you're going to try to pursue some other internships in the future, but you have a year to figure out what that will bring.
So, I mean, I reached out to, because I did a lot of stuff with NFEC with the town, just going to town meetings, but I didn't do anything with the town itself. So I've like the planning department, I've asked maybe possibly a winter internship we're talking about. And then I've sent out some applications I would love to intern for one of the council people or the supervisor. I really love working in public government. I'm not a very big like think tank NGO type of guy. So I'm hoping that whatever I do, it's something public.
And also, you mentioned going to do a master's. What were you thinking in terms of that? Because I know you mentioned law as a possibility.
So for my master's, I'd love to get my master's in public policy. A lot of people in my program want the MPA, which is public administration, which is kind of like to be a bureaucrat to work at the DMV or something, which nothing wrong for that, but it's not for me. I'd like to get a specialized master's in public policy and transport or zoning or infrastructure or things like that, or welfare even. Like I said, I'm a very bread and butter guy. When I was in DC, I got all the boring stuff people didn't want. Like I did the trains, the welfare, things like agricultural plans. I like to do things like that. Other people think of minor. All the interns wanted, war in Ukraine, or they wanted to handle the banks and things like that.
Yeah. You mentioned what you might gravitate towards in your master's, but were you even thinking about doing a master's in urban planning? Or
I was actually thinking about doing a master's in urban planning because I wanted to do the bachelor's in it, and I was like, okay, this is my last opportunity. But I've talked to a lot of urban planners, and the number one thing they say is don't get your degree in urban planning, because you could come in with any other related degree and then just become an urban planner without like pigeonholing yourself in. Yes. I was really interested, and then I talked to someone, I can't say who it was, and they were like, listen, don't waste the money, kid. If you really want, get your master's in art history and then come. It's
too narrow.
Yeah. One more thing. Think tank. With my master's, I would love to work for a think tank and actually just write the policy. Either that or work for a municipality and help them implement it. Those are the two things that I'd really want to do with my master's. So it's between those two and law school.
It's interesting because we've had other people on that have become lawyers, and I think they've changed their path where they worked as that, but then they went to something else because they felt like they couldn't do as much within that. They were just working with wording and things within a law policy, whereas they might have gone on to do something else more grassroots or something in another area. But I think there is that, I don't know if it's a stigma of lawyers within politics, and are they really getting things done, and should we have more people that aren't lawyers in government, more working? It could be like farmers or other people, but then do they know how to do the policy making part? But I think that's a challenge that we see with lawyers. They're all just working within that policy making, and we might not see progress.
What I'm going to say is that a lot of people are it's going to sound weird, but lawyers by class. Like my dad was a lawyer, or my dad was a CEO or something, and then I became a lawyer. The way I see it is we need people who like get the law school and they understand the laws so that they could know that when they're changing the system, but that they come into that with outside experiences. So we don't necessarily need everyone to be a lawyer, but I think we need more farmers, waiters, laborers, and things like that who have come to study law, and it might be their occupation, but they're not a lawyer at heart. Things I feel like we need to understand it, but at the same time, we need to have more of us, more normal people in office, kind of grounding it. I feel like everyone always says this about whatever era they live in, but I feel like, of course, they're a little bit more detached than I would like when it comes to politics. Yeah.
Yes. And then I was curious about your, I guess, more focused on the North Fork. What do you think, even with doing your internship here and then growing up here, what do you think are the three most important issues facing the North Fork?
At this very moment, I feel like the number one immediate issue, which I don't know if it's the biggest long-term issue, but it's definitely the big issue right now, is housing. My thing is like, if I told you, like if I was just writing about what's happening and I told you people were leaving, families were getting broken up, some people had to live far away from their loved ones, there's homeless people, there's tenement apartments sprouting up, you'd be thinking like, oh my God, like this guy's talking about the 1800s or something, like, what is happening? And then I'm like, no, this is the housing crisis. Even though it's not directly violent, I feel like some of its consequences, like having to move away from dear ones, feel violent in their way. You know, I'm like, this is something that you read about happening to like Polish World War II refugees. Why is it happening to a bunch of people here where the only unlucky part of their lives is that they can't afford a house? And I really want that to be nailed down, that this is immediate and it's important and there's consequences to this that are being ignored. When I have kids one day, am I going to be forced to look at them and say like, hey, sorry, like I really wanted to show you where I'm from and the lessons I've taught. I wanted my community, that as our community is older than some countries are, you know, Southold Town is founded in 1640, Germany, Mexico, Italy, those countries don't pop up until about the 1800s, you know, so am I going to be able to give my kids this rich tradition, or am I going to have to look at them and say, hey, I was a loser, I couldn't buy a house, and now I'm not going to be able to spread onto you my tradition and culture. I want to make sure that never happens. There's people in this town who I want to look them in the eye and tell them, hey, when your mother kicks the bucket, you'll be able to afford to bury her here in her home. And I don't think anyone is entitled to anything, but I feel like we're entitled to a part of our community, even if we don't open a house in it. Number two is poverty. This I feel like is terribly ignored on the North Fork. When I was at my affordable housing presentation and programming, forgot who it was, Daniela Menavas, I think, sorry for butchering your name, who was she works with CAST. She helps social work. She was like something about 30% of kids in Mattituck, 50% of kids in Southold, and 73% of kids in Greenport live in poverty. And I was a kid who grew up out here in poverty. And so I hate to think that it keeps on happening. And I feel like we have to do something about this. And I just feel like it's just like the housing crisis. It's really been swept under the rug. And then for the third biggest problem, it's more existential. It's global warming. Obviously, we live on the water and the water is rising. And our environment is going to change for a while, a very long time, at least our lifetimes. And I feel like we have to come to terms with that. I feel like of the things the town board has done, that's what they're best at all this climate change stuff. You know, don't close too close to the water, get away from the bluff and things like that. But that's definitely going to be a big issue. First, because areas of climate change always lead to political and social upheaval. The revolutions of 1848, for all my history fans out there, which was like this plague of revolutions that just spread across Europe, was caused by bad crops. French Revolution happened because there was hailstorms and bad weather. And during the last major moment of climate change we had, called the Little Winter in the 1640s, we see religious violence spread all over Europe. And I think that we are going, probably not to see that level of violence or anything, but we're going to see major upheaval on a national and a global stage. And then we're going to have to also tackle rising water at home here.
But in terms of housing, do you think that's something that the town should be tackling, or the village, or would you, because some people say, oh, well, some people might say there's not much we can do on that, or maybe leave it to the state or federal, but then some people might not want the state getting involved.
I feel like the town has to do something about it now. I feel like their incompetence first when it comes to things like shutting down tenement homes and Airbnbs, and their lack of action on building affordable housing has been terrible. Kathy Hochul tried to change the zoning on railroad stations, and they said, no, we're going to take this into our own hands, and they haven't done anything. In fact, I feel like they've stood in the way of affordable housing. They've consistently voted against it. And I'm starting to think that this is all a bit nefarious. I'm starting to think that you're denying the state the right to change. You're always complaining about affordable housing when it pops up. You're not doing anything to mitigate the tenement homes that pop up, which, there's whole families living in single rooms. It's just asking for breeding grounds for like filth and tenement abuse and sexual abuse. And then the Airbnbs out here, which are kind of just constricting the housing market. It makes me think that they're doing this on purpose. It makes me think that they're doing this so that they could keep their property prices expensive and that they don't care about the average North Forkers. And I think that if you want to have that conversation and say, I don't want Queen Kathy to stand on her soap bucket and tell me what to do with my community, that's fine. But I'm a member of this community. I was raised on this community, in this community, and I've always been here. And I'm telling you right now that we need that. And I'm talking to you, North Fork resident to North Fork resident. Yes. And I feel like action has to happen now. And I'm starting to get skeptical and thinking that maybe there's a reason why there's no action, and it's not a good one.
Because I think it would be good to have more housing that's more compact and not sprawl, or more big subdivisions, and using even... I mean, there would be a whole nother topic with the Long Island Railroad and trying to improve.
My pipe dream has always been, so in Germany and in Europe, they got these things called a city train. So it's kind of like commuter. It's like LIRR on the way into a city. And then it turns into like kind of like a subway. And
even light rail.
Yes. It's known as, the light rail version of that is known as a tram train. And my like ultimate, like my mouth waters when I think of this is kind of establishing and electrifying the rails from Greenport to Riverhead and having a tram train that runs. And then I feel like we could really create walkable communities because if you ever look at a map of Old South, Old Town, Old Greenport before cars, obviously it was walkable. And then we're one of the first places that gets the railroad. We really grow up on the railroad. And then after the railroad stations, there used to be way more. A lot of people don't know them. They used to have one in Peconic. They used to have one in Jamesport, one in Cutchogue. After those are shut down in the late 50s, early 60s, I feel like you could still feel the impact of that on our community today. People always want to say, you don't have to make us a rail-centric community. I think we're already a rail-centric community, and we're really suffering because we kind of pulled that back. I really do like mixed use, though. I think the key is to do like 4 to 3 family homes, and then you have those spread out, mixed out with single family homes. So you kind of cut back on the sprawl without having to spend all this time bickering about, I don't want an apartment complex here. I don't want a third floor here. I think the key is mixed use.
Yeah. And I think, there's obviously the buses too that could use improvement, but I think
the S92. So
the S92.
Like I said, I was a very poor kid. So all the other underprivileged kids who grew up out here know that the S92 it's not very on time. It's a lifeline. I used to always take it to Riverhead to get my groceries so I could eat, but it's not too on time, and it's a rough, bumpy ride.
Yeah.
I want to see some improvement on that, but I have fond memories of playing my DS on the bus.
And I know that you mentioned with providing a mixed use. We've already seen, even in Greenport, there's not a lot of space, or people would say there's not a lot of space to expand. So you'd have to accessory dwelling unit.
Yes.
Or even building on top of a single story building. And I think there are buildings that are already 2 or 3 stories and that's not going to affect people's view or the canopy of the village and changing what people would think the village looks like. I don't think that's...
Yeah, personally, I think ADUs are great. They really do help, but I feel it's like a band-aid on a bullet hole. 700 people on the housing registry. You're not going to build 200 accessory dwelling units that could house like 2 people max. But I think that accessory dwelling units and that combination of mixed use where you do allow some 3-story buildings. You already have some, maybe a little bit more scrutiny, definitely not as much as we've seen with the NIMBYism, won't change the character of the North Fork. I think what really changes the character is, here's my problem. People always define the character of the North Fork. That's their way of saying there's single homes on large acres that are worth a lot of money. And there's a lot of green space with no nature that I could look at like a well, like a good watered lawn or something. I think the actual character of the North Fork is made up by those who live here. It's made up by you and me and everybody working in this library and all the kids who come in and the cash registers at IGA and the people scooping ice cream at Magic Fountain. And that in the effect of this of this housing crisis, as all these people, especially those who work at Magic Fountain or our waiters, start to leave and things like that, our community loses the vital character of its residents. And what's left is kind of like a husk. Like if you ever heard people talk about Greenport in the winter, it's a little empty. I feel like that's what's going to happen to our community if we just keep letting people get kicked out, getting priced out. We're going to lose the character of what makes the North Fork, which is our beautiful maritime culture and our spirit. And none of that's going to be left over. It's going to be too much turnover to pass down those generations. I'm first gen. I'm 0th gen, actually. I was born in Puerto Rico and came over here when I was young. And there were so many Greenporters around to be like, this is the Maritime Festival. I want to share this with you. I want you to indulge in this. I want you to know that you'll always be one of us. This is Claudio's. It's a little expensive, but it's a big part of us too. You go down to Preston to get your fishing gear. You go into you go to Mitchell Park, you sit down, and I hope that I could pass those memories on to a whole new generation of North Forkers, and that I allow those who have already cultivated that to stay here and pass that on.
Yes. And do you see some people might say, oh, well, if you want to see what's going to happen, just look towards the South Fork and what has happened there. Obviously they have their challenges, but even how that area has changed since the 70s and 80s and more of the extreme wealth of the area. I
think a lot of people always like the Hamptons, the South Fork, that's what we should be looking up to. I think that's the disaster zone. I don't want us to end up like in the husk of a community who's really lost all of its culture and creativity and things like that to concentrated wealth. Now they're building like these huge apartment complexes and things like that in the Hamptons, but it's too late. They've lost a lot of their longtime residents. It's been replaced by longtime money. And I start to see that here. I'm a very welcoming person, and I love when people come to Greenport and I could show them more about their community. At the same time, I want to make sure to preserve my community. And I think that's not going to happen. Instead, I think I will have grown up poor in this community to see someone else with concentrated wealth come in and enjoy what we've all built without putting in any of the effort.
And they won't understand what the area was and the history of even the working class. And then that also is, you're losing a diversity of socioeconomic groups and just a concentrated thing of wealth, which I think would be unfortunate.
I see right now we're a maritime culture hub. What I see us happening is becoming a country club instead, which I would definitely not prefer.
And you mentioned poverty, and I know caste has kind of been helping in that regards. Within the system, within capitalism, people would say there's flaws, or there's really big flaws, and caste has filled in some gaps there with providing food and resources. And then I think this is even on a national level, whether with inflation or other challenges economically, that would definitely be coming more from the state or federal level. What do you think we should be doing, or as a country as a whole, in terms of tackling some of the bigger issues? I think we're losing the middle class, and there's that higher concentration of wealth, and I think there's more people even that are making what you would think would be a regular salary, or falling into maybe lower to middle class, or even downward.
So I'd like to say, for us who if you ever take an AP US or even normal US, which I'm sure everyone has, you get to this little part of the textbook called the Progressive Era. And about like after the Civil War, so like 1890s to about the First World War, where there's a lot of progress. There's cars popping up, there's factories now, but it's everything starts to get about a little worse, and it's progress going on, but it doesn't feel good. They called it the Gilded Era because gilded means it's plated by gold, but on the inside it's still rubbish or whatever you've gilded. And people always say history repeats. I like to say history rhymes, and we're seeing a lot of parallels. We're seeing a rise in poverty, working conditions are getting worse. So I think we're kind of in like that same rut of history right now.
Which was like in the 20s.
From
or
about like the 1890s to the First World War is about the Gilded Era.
And before you got to the Great Depression
Yep.
in the late 20s. No, that's interesting seeing that comparison. And you mentioned the environment.
Oh, what were you saying about caste earlier?
Oh, just in terms of, I had Kathy Demorato on, and she talked about that came about as a war on poverty in the 60s. And they've been filling in some gaps where maybe the town or the village isn't able to, or they can't provide food or other resources to people on the North Fork that are struggling.
I love caste personally. When I was a little kid, before my mom could get us together and, really get on her feet, my mom's she was a teacher's aide and now she's a social worker up in Riverhead. We did go to caste. As a kid, I always felt this horrible sense of embarrassment of going to caste. They'd always have brownies and like bagels and things to give you, like to cheer you up while your parents are in there getting canned goods or clothes or something. So I think what they do out here is absolutely vital. But I do think that the municipality has to take some of the burden of that on them, because if you look at this, 50% of children in Southold are in poverty and 70% in Greenport. There is no poverty. A majority of us are in it. It's an epidemic at this point. Like we just can't keep our eyes closed, and the little break glass of emergency button, well, time to break the glass.
Yes. And I think it's not as obvious. It's almost invisible in some ways, seeing some of the poverty, because I think it can be shielded off compared to even, say, what you saw in the 30s or during the Depression, where you saw people really on the street. And I don't know if you would agree, you don't see that as much here, but it can still, people can be struggling within their homes. You just don't see it.
I feel like the reason we don't really get like that 1930s the same way we do here is because a lot of the jobs in Greenport definitely don't pay enough to live here, but they just don't pay enough in general. A lot of the full times here are service jobs. You work at the Greenporter, you work at a restaurant, you work like something that's not enough to make your money, so you apply for welfare. And then I feel like things like that subsidize this economy. I feel for the most part Greenport is very dependent on things like Section 8 and food stamps. There's no shame in that. I've collected both of those things in the past. But I think it's not a very good sign for our community that we're very economically dependent on this program. That's a sign. Not that there's something wrong with using those programs. Please go ahead and use those. A sign that we're in the conditions where they have to constantly be used. And I feel like, do you know what astroturfing is? Let me explain that to the folks who are listening. So a grassroots movement is very simple. You start from the bottom up, you organize. Astroturfing is kind of like fake grassroots. Like you get a lot of money donated to you or something, and you put together like a fake campaign backed by corporate money. Like, you'll see a commercial asking them to lower the taxes on soda, and then you Google who paid for it, and it's Coca-Cola or something like that. I feel like that's what happens out here, where the people with the voice, people with the money, they're saying everything's all right. This is our beautiful maritime community. We're nice and rural. I love the character of it, but there's more bubbling underneath that in Southold Town that I feel like has been coming to the top ever since the 70s and is going to boil over in our lifetimes. And I feel like the time to live in our imagination is over. Now we all have to get back to reality, which I don't really see happening right now.
And then now, for yourself, you mentioned in terms of your master's and what you might pursue in that regards, but where do you see yourself 10 years from now? 10
years from now, I always say what I want to do is I want to spend like that first 10 years either with my master's and my law degree working. It's either going to be DC or New York. I don't really see myself living outside of those two cities. But I want to be there for a while, and then I definitely want to come back home. I want to come back here. I'm very attached to Greenport, obviously. I'm doing this interview in my Greenport High School shirt. And I'd like to take an active role in this community. My favorite book is Obama's book, Dreams from My Father. And he talks about how he's not from Chicago, he's from Hawaii, but he acted as a community organizer in Chicago before he went to law school and before he was president, of course. And just getting to see how that impacted him with a community that he had never been a part of, and the connection he was able to form, and just kind of like how he became bonded to his work. I'd love to take those fruits back home here. Like, you know, people talk about sports stars going home, like LeBron goes to Cleveland or something. I want to come back with the talents. For me, that would be the ultimate thing. Yeah.
And we've obviously talked about some of the issues, but what would you hope to see for the North Fork and its community down the line?
For the future of the North Fork, I'd love... Okay, so aside from affordable housing, of course, I kind of want to see it preserved, but not really in the way a lot of people talk about it preserved. A lot of people say that they want it to, you know, everything looks the same, you know, keep it nice and rural. But when I mean preserved, is I'd like to see that our traditions have continued, that I'll come back here in 20 years with my kids, and then we'll go and we'll see the fire department parade down the street, or we'll go to the Maritime Festival and we'll buy trinkets and things like that. And I would love for our maritime history to really also come back a little bit. We've lost some of that. And just like the oystering and the fishing out here, I'd really love for that to stay. I want this to remain the North Fork in terms of culture, but I want it to be updated for the 21st century. You know, I want to see communities where we could walk, so everyone who can't afford a car can enjoy the North Fork, like I've been able to enjoy it here in Greenport. I want to see more accessible things, so not everybody has to go to Riverhead to do, I don't know, to do groceries or something. I want to see options pop up so that we could do it here. And I would like to see more people living here. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, chopping down all the parks. I believe something about like 26% of the land in South Old Town is preserved, either owned by the Community Preservation Fund or they own the development rights on it. So I know those green spaces are going to stay. But outside of that, I'd like to be able to share the North Fork with both longtime residents and people who were born here, and those who want to come and indulge. I want to see this community grow. I'm not a very big fan of saying, hey, no more hotels, no more businesses, no more houses and things like that. I want to see the North Fork spirit that we've always had adapted for the 21st century, so that we can continue to preserve that. But we can't keep our heads, like we're not ostriches, we can't dig our heads in the sand and just be like, no development, no nothing. I want nobody to live out here, and I want it to stay just like this.
Or say just, let Riverhead deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. So when I went to New York City and I met all these other students, they're usually from like New York City, or they're from Albany, or they're from Jersey or something. And they're like, where are you from? I'm saying I'm from Greenport. They're like, where's that? It's the last stop on the train. They're like, no, like, where actually is it? Like, you're kidding. I'm like, no, it's actually the last stop on the train. But I'm kind of like I'm provincial in a way. Like, it's kind of like I'm a hillbilly or something. Like I'm coming out of the bushes of like Australia or Tennessee. Yeah. And not that I don't love that, but I would like to see us pop our heads and open up more doors for this community so that we could contain that, while at the same time not really having to suffer from a lot of the problems that rural communities do. And it's really just like an interesting outlook this has given me. I agree with both Democrats and Republicans on a lot of stuff, and it's because I'm at heart, us Greenporters, we're kind of from the boonies, you know? We're from New York State, which is this very metropolitan and bustling place, and we get lots of city people and we go to the city a lot. But at the end of the day, we're still 3 hours away. Yeah. You know, I wake up every day and I could walk to the water. If I really wanted to, I could wake up, I could go grab my rifle and shoot a deer, or I could pull a fish out of the water, and things like that. So I just hope to enjoy those things with more people in a new generation.
And I usually ask at the end if there was anything else you wanted to discuss or say that we haven't talked about.
Okay. I really do want to see more young people take place in government over here in South Old Town, because I feel like that's the fight. Like, no matter whatever you're going to vote for, I just want to see you at the ballot box. You could be my most sworn enemy ever, but as long as I see you voting, I wouldn't say a bad word about you. And I feel like we have to put more engagement on schools, civic engagement in schools out here. For example, Mattituck is very great on civic engagement. You know, they help you register their register to vote. Their civics and economics classes are a lot better than mine were at Greenport. And I would really just love to see that spread out to Greenport and Southold so that young people know how to become involved, and even just some programming for older people too, so that we could all be involved. Especially in a small community like this, it's very important that we exercise all of our voices and that we all put in our opinions, because I think that whether you're Bill Gates' son or whether, you know, you just woke up on the street on Mitchell Park or something, like right outside of Mitchell Park, we all should be listened to and we all should be heard. And I think that's very important for such a small community out here. And I want more of that.
Do you think, because you mentioned even young people, whether different opinions or just a wide range of people providing their voices, do you see that even in your college, where you might get people where you'll argue, or obviously they might give you things where you're on this side and they're on that side, but people today and discussing things, whether it's more bipartisan or a partisan way, do you think that's been a struggle? And obviously there might be more extremes in what people might think today, or whether it's the extreme right or extreme left, but do you think it's harder for people to come together and discuss things in a way that's, they don't just, okay, you're a bad person if you think this shouldn't happen? Or
So I feel like politics has always been very personal. Like, you know, 1854, people don't know whether they should have slavery in Kansas. A bunch of dudes from Missouri come in, and then John Brown comes and he kills them with a sword over their political opinions. He says slavery is bad, and that's always been a part of it. You know, I feel like that the problem now isn't that specifically. It's that we've gotten into these very solid two camps. And it used to be like in the 1860s or something, you could agree with LBJ that, yeah, we need FAFSA, we need aid for college, but I don't like the Vietnam War. But now we start to split into two very different camps. You used to have conservatives and liberals in both parties. But now it's kind of just like, this is one side and this is the other. And even if I really, 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 really don't like the stuff that other people do in my party, as long as I still get my cut of the cake, I'm going to stay in that tent. And then the people over on the other side are thinking the same thing. So I think actually that like this heat for politics and even thinking it's personal it's bad for your social relationships, so it must be contained. But I think it's good for society. It's good for the marketplace of ideas to have even more vendors and more passion behind their ideas. But I think it's bad that we're kind of being constrained down to these two monopolies, so that we have to throw ourselves in with everybody else in like kind of the same lot. I feel like even though people could talk more freely about their ideas, especially with social media now, they're not as free to implement them. Because everything, if it's not in this basket or this basket, it's not happening. And even if I like it, but it's in the other basket, it's too late. I'm already turned against it.
I'm already on this.
Yeah.
I can't really go over there, and people might judge you differently. Why did you decide to? Whereas maybe there were chances, I mean, there might not be, there's not as much of that today, but in the past there might have been, well, I can vote on this over here, and people aren't going to shun me because I decided to agree with that. And even like we're talking about social media, I think there's been positives with social media, and I think there's also been negatives in that regard, in terms of almost like a shaming type platform. But it's good in terms of getting people together and on a grassroots effort, but then also thinking about the person on the other side of that. It's not just like, oh, this is that, I'll just say this, you're this and that. And so I think it's tough navigating that environment as well.
I don't usually talk too much about politics, but when I do get riled up and I'll get fiery, I don't know, I often fall into that. I'll be like, raise the tariffs or something like that, or like leave Europe or whatever. And a lot of people do think that's a negative thing. But for me, I want as much, every argument, I think about it like this. So it's like there's these two kind of matches like running at each other, and they're like hitting each other kind of with like every single part of the argument. And when you do it enough, between enough people, you catch fire and you get light. And that's how we develop our political ideas, and especially how people feel so unrepresented by our government now. I feel like they don't have that same appreciation as we used to for the marketplace of ideas, because we've had the freedom of speech and the freedom of thought for so long. We're starting to take it for granted. So at this point, I think it's better that things are divisive, because in the end we can hash them out, rather than us not talking about it and not airing it when the personal borders on the political, because we have norms to listen to. I just feel like it's a necessary part of the political process, and that we kind of benefit from it, if that makes sense.
And you think even with politicians going back and forth on Twitter and saying certain things,
I would actually say the opposite for politicians, only because when me and you talk about that, we're like advocating our ideas, and then we're going to go to the ballot box, hopefully, and see them through. I think what has become a problem now is that politicians have become very performative. They'll tweet out that they think this, and then just because they want to become more polarized and, try to drag more people into their camp, they start sending out tweets saying this and that people get the wrong idea. They think like, hey, the congressman wrote this really like strong tweet about how much he hates, like, I don't know, taxes or something. So he actually has to like really hate them. But instead, I feel like they're just kind of engaging in performative activism. And also, I feel like when we have these political things on the normal level, you and me, we don't have to get along. It's a free country. I could just come, like, if we're coworkers, we could work together. Or if we're friends, we could work together, and we could never talk politics. When it comes to politicians, they need to work together, because we have to hold them more accountable. I feel like having the option to be petty and not want to work with other Congress members and be like, no, I'm not going to settle until I get exactly what I want, isn't a luxury that not only that they can afford, it's not one that we can afford and grant to them. In some ways, among normal people, I'd say fiery political conversations is what I want to hear. I want to hear us hashing it out. But by the time you get to Congress, you've already been elected. You've already hashed those things out. You've paid your dues. We know exactly what you're there for. Your party's on the ballot. They tick the box.
You don't need to be doing another performative action.
This is back to what I was saying before. I want to be pragmatic. Like, finish up the debate and start writing and voting on the bill, and lay off the Twitter.
Yeah.
We think of the North Fork kind of as like a very unique community, of course, which it is. We don't really see like rural waterside communities like in New York or on the Eastern Seaboard, really. But part of me thinking a lot about history is I've become a lot better at pattern recognition. I feel like one of the things that we have to realize is that there's a lot of places in America, particularly in the Rust Belt or in the South, that really mirror Greenport. And I think that, Southold in general, North Fork in general. And I feel like we have to get out of our little box that this is some like very special, unique place, and start looking at those other places and see how they are, so that we could grow as a community and possibly learn from them. Like cities like New Yorkers are looking at what's happening in Philadelphia, are looking at what's happening in Dallas, are looking at what is happening in LA. I feel like we have to take more account to what's happening in similar communities all over America, and kind of realize that, hey, we're not alone in all this global warming and this housing crisis and things like that, and that we very much have company, and we should reach out. Like, some places have sister towns or sister cities or things like that. I think it would be very nice for us to reach out into our niche of whatever you would like to call this, whether it's rural or suburb, and kind of, just look around and realize we're not all alone in this world. Kind of.
Yeah, I think that's important. We're not the only ones dealing with this problem or issues, and it will take all of us to come together to figure out and tackle some of these issues. Were there any other last minute things you wanted to
just one last thing I want to wrap up, just because I've been a lot on the political side of things. People, I know you want to emphasize, we always want to emphasize that, their kids should be doctors or lawyers. Like things like that. And so when I went to NYU with my scholarship, they paid for it. I have like this big program of kids doing things. It's a scholarship for POC. There's no emphasis on us who don't want to do STEM and who don't want to do automatic money makers. Like, if you don't want to be a doctor, engineer, a computer scientist or something, they're like, okay, whatever, the programs are for them. Go do your own thing. I think it's very important for everyone, even if you're not a person of color, to allow your kids to nurture whatever they love. Like, I really love history and things like that. And I want people to be more open to, when your kid studies, it doesn't always necessarily have to be for a job. I'm not saying take out $20,000 in debt for an art degree, but I'm saying, take some classes at Suffolk or things like that. Become more educated. One of the arguments you hear, whether or not you agree with the government paying for people's college, is that's very expensive. Why do you want to pay for people's college and things like that? I just want to live in a more educated world. Like, for example, public schools aren't for the benefit of students in schools or for the benefits of their parents. I'm quoting John Green here. They're for the benefit of society as a whole. And I feel like we should really start to take that approach to higher levels of learning. I feel like it should be very normal, especially out here, because Suffolk is the cheapest college in all of New York, where people could take a class in whatever they want and just become more educated.
Yeah, I think that's become more of a challenge with people and what they're deciding on majoring in and what they want to do in life, and even limiting yourself to those specific areas, whatever background or economic class. Because I think you could even observe with, if someone's going into the humanities or the arts, do they tend to have more of a financial cushion or come from more of a, like, oh, well, my parents can send me here because they'll pay for the $80,000 at Parsons School in New York City. It shouldn't be that way. I mean, obviously, people need to survive and make money within the system, and technically doesn't benefit people who go into the humanities or history, but those are still, I think, important things that are good for people creatively and to think critically about things in different ways than just going into, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a doctor, because those make money. But I don't do what you feel about that.
I just think that I want those, like, humanities to kind of, and arts become more accessible, because everybody always says, it's like the same thing with, like, if you want to make real money, don't be a waiter, like, don't work at McDonald's. And then those same people complain when there's nobody to wait tables or give you your hamburger. It's the same kind of thing where everyone's like, don't waste don't waste my money, my tax dollars going to learn art history or music or theater. Well, then live in a world without those things and realize, hey, maybe I want more people around than just engineers and dentists and lawyers and such. And I just think that education it's such a valuable commodity, and it's easy to lose. It's there was something called the Bronze Age collapse once, before the Romans and even before the ancient Greeks. We had societies before those in the Bronze Age, when they had just discovered metalworking. And then at some point during that, there's this earthquake. Either it's conflicted. Some people say it's an earthquake storm, which is exactly what it sounds like. There's a bunch of earthquakes hitting either the Eastern Mediterranean. The people living in the Eastern Mediterranean said there were these people called the Sea People who were coming to attack them and destroy their cities. But anyway, after their society collapsed, the written language and education goes with it. And you see the same thing happened after the Romans collapsed in Western Europe. Education and the written language becomes rarer and rarer. So I think that obviously our civilization is not going to collapse anytime soon, but we have to take advantage of things like this, and we can't be taking them for granted. So I want as many people to be educated as whatever they want as they can. You could be looking at pigeon eggs, or you could want to be a dentist, or, you could want to learn how to make Van Goghs again.
Yeah, with just keeping that open so people can explore their own paths. And I think the world would be more boring without those. And I think we are seeing, whether it's tuition, which is a really big problem, and I know whether it's for people wanting to go to college, and universities are also dealing with their budgets and challenges, and usually the first things to go that are cut are usually in the humanities.
Yes, the libraries especially,
the libraries,
and then humanities and education, arts and theater.
So that's going to be something that we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm going to have to brace.
Yeah. No, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story. And it's really nice having someone more recent that is a graduate of Greenport and involved in the community and has passion for what you hope for the future of the area, and as well as talking about your views and time interning and in college. And I wish you all the best on your future endeavors.
Thank you. I want to thank you for having me and giving me this opportunity. But I just want to thank you for hosting this in general. It's a great way to preserve and document our community and the members of it and just how rich it is. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Care.
Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 98 with Yan Albaladejo. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.